Good morning. This week I have been looking over the lectionary readings, and I just love the way that they blend the readings this week, contrasting how people respond to God's calling. Jonah was called to be a prophet to the city of Nineveh, but instead of going east to the city, he gets himself in a boat and goes west. That's right. Jonah goes as far away from the call as he possibly can. His epic adventure includes being thrown overboard from a ship, swallowed by a whale, and finally thrown up at the very point he started running from his mission. Let me share this reading from you. Jonah chapter 3, verses 1 to 5 and verse 10, read from the New International Version of the Bible. Then the word of the Lord came to Jonah a second time. Go to the city of Nineveh and proclaim to it the message I give you. Jonah obeyed the word of the Lord and went to Nineveh. Now Nineveh was a very large city. It took 3 days to go through it. Jonah began by going a day's journey into a city, proclaiming, 40 more days and Nineveh will be overthrown. The Ninevites believed God. A fast was proclaimed, and for all of them, the greatest to the least, put on sackcloth. Now, I could begin by berating Jonah for his lack of faith or courage, but it's more helpful, I think, to identify with him first for a moment, don't you think? Could it be that Jonah was given an impossible mission? Maybe. I read that Nineveh was one of the greatest cities of its day. It was a city full of conquerors, a strong commercial base, superior technology, and was known as a powerful war machine. Jonah, on the other hand, was from a small strip of wilderness that the rest of the world passed through as a way station to go somewhere else. Jonah had no credentials for such an act of international relations. Yet God called Jonah to be the messenger to Nineveh. The Ninevites needed to hear what Jonah had to say so that they would turn from their evil practices. The people were hungry, perhaps starving for the message that he was to bring. Perhaps they knew what they were doing was wrong. They recognized they were on the wrong path, but they didn't know another one to take. What if God called us to be the messenger to our own Nineveh? Having been removed at the moment from our sanctuaries, we've been pushed out to speak to a world around us, especially to that neighbor who is hard to love in times like these, right? As I read in another commentary on this passage, Jonah was not called to preach to the choir. He was called to speak to the people who were on the other side of his life experience. He was called to offer another chance to the people that benefited from his past hurt and harm. That's a hard thing to do. And so we can understand his reluctance. Yet we are called to do the hard thing. We only have to look at the political turmoil of the United States. Many leaders have called for healing, but unfortunately their version of healing seems to be just moving on from it with the recent events, as if what has happened over the last number of years just didn't happen. But real healing requires proper and correct diagnosis of the problem and recognizing that the problem existed. For healing to take place, what and who has been broken has to be made whole. Hurt people, including themselves. So for healing to take place, the hard work of repair in the lives of the powerful must begin. And that also includes grace. I really like the saying, maybe a reminder for myself as well, that we all want grace for ourselves, but we want judgment for those who have harmed us. I believe this is what Jonah's testimony is to us. Jonah may not be one of our patron saints. The world conspires to make Jonahs out of all of us, though. The world tries to keep us down and tell us that we can't change the big picture. So we just try to stay in line and make the best living for ourselves and our families. Our values, though, may tell us that we need to head to Nineveh. But we turn and we walk west. and get on that boat with Jonah. Because, well, it's hard. It's just too hard. We might even spend some of our precious time in the belly of a whale, out of touch with our calling or our sense of meaning and purpose. Because loving our enemies is hard. Resentment flows so much easier, don't you think? This weekend, I'll be sharing another passage from Mark's Gospel about the first 4 disciples, Andrew, Peter, James, and John. And while it takes 3 chapters for Jonah to get to Nineveh, in a remarkable 4 verses, these fishermen leave their nets, their security, their families, and follow Jesus. Well, I don't know about you, but I think I'd need at least 48 hours to at least think through the decision, to weigh my consequences and the implications and what this career move is all about. Of course, though, by the time I spent all that time thinking about that, Jesus would have already moved on to the next town. This kind of immediacy was captured in a TV series you might remember called Early Edition. The show was about this average guy with a good heart and modest prospects who receives an early edition of the Chicago Sun-Times every morning. In it, he doesn't get the news of yesterday, but he actually gets what's going to happen today. That is, unless he does something to change the future. So he spends his day trying to avert various disasters, and when he's successful, the news in the paper actually changes. And he has these 2 friends that are his alter egos on the show. One who urges him on, and the other one who is more like a Jonah, counseling him to let things go because there are some things you just can't change. Too bad there isn't a show like that on today. A show that would allow us to wrestle with the dilemmas of what role we play in other people's lives. How would we act differently if we knew the potential differences our lives can make to others? In our cynicism, we may forget that maybe God is already working through us, weaving together our daily decisions. The call to follow God's direction, purpose, and plan requires more than we sometimes feel equipped to give or more than we want to expend. Yet, Nineveh is all around us. People who need a message of hope that calls for recognition and repair. And so, I hate to tell you folks, but we're called to do the hard work. God has called us to it. So let us go into the rest of this week, challenged by God's call. May we have the courage to do so. Amen. Have a great week.